Forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads. Prefer a dunk. And expect nothing but the best. This was the Big Ten. Now this is Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Deace.
Happy Thanksgiving to all of you. Welcome to the Rivalry Week episode of Bigger Ten. I am Steve Deace with my co-host, never partner, the one and only Aaron McIntyre. Good to see you again, brother. And are you ready for, it's the most bittersweet time of the year. It's the best weekend of games every year, but it also means we're winding down the most wonderful time of the year at the same time.
Yeah, I think, you're never ready for the end of football season. But as I said before, just with the scheduling anomaly, I brought this up 3 or 4 times this season. It felt like college football season had room to breathe. And that's, it's going to be different this year because of the expanded college football playoff. So I'm not going to say when it's all over, like all over, that we're going to be, okay, that's enough football for now. I think it's going to be as close to that as we've ever had it when it comes to college football. Because it seems like no matter if my team, the Chiefs, are in the Super Bowl, it seems like after the Super Bowl is over, I'm just speaking for myself, I'm done with football for a while. I'm ready to take a break for a little while, for like a couple of months. I think it's going to come close to feeling like that with college football this year in particular.
I mean, we've still got 2 months left in the season, almost. I mean, the national championship game is January 20th now with the expanded playoffs. So, yeah, I mean, this is still going to go for a while. All right, so let's get started with our big 5 topics here on Bigger Ten. And listen, Indiana was outclassed by Ohio State on Saturday, Aaron. And you had Urban Meyer say on the big noon kickoff, just watching the teams warm up, he's like, these are 2 different body types that are out here. Okay, and Indiana's offense, after getting an early touchdown, did exactly jack and squat for the rest of the game. They got kind of a garbage time touchdown themselves. Defensively, they gave Ohio State a lot of what they could handle, held the Buckeyes to under 400 yards, got a couple of nice red zone stops, but they had meltdowns in the special teams. They could not block Ohio State's defensive front, and they were kind of outclassed in the game. Nevertheless, they lost that battle, but they may have won the war. Because I think the big worry for Indiana going into this weekend or this last weekend was with such a shaky strength of schedule, just finally playing a ranked opponent and face planting. I guess they were face planting adjacent, but then the results of elsewhere in college football, Ole Miss with a 3rd loss, Alabama with a 3rd loss, Texas A&M with a 3rd loss. I mean, I think as long as, they beat Purdue on Saturday and literally by any score, given what's happened elsewhere, they won the war. I think I was really concerned about them not making the playoff before they lost that game. Ironically, after they lost it, I'm less concerned because looking at the rest of the landscape, there's just not a lot of 2-loss teams to challenge their 11-1 record. So they lost the battle, but I think they won the war last weekend.
Oh, yeah. It was a crazy weekend. So I wasn't able to watch most of that game. We had one side of the family's Thanksgiving on Saturday, and so I wasn't able to keep close tabs on that. But I was able to kind of watch the score a couple of times, and yeah, it kind of looked like it got out of hand pretty quickly for them there at the start of the second half, beginning with the punt return and in the first half, at the end of the first half. But it was absolutely crazy because their loss was a complete and total afterthought once the day was done. They stubbed their toe, and then Alabama especially, but you mentioned Texas A&M, Ole Miss. They said, hold my beer, watch me stub my brain, because especially the Alabama game, that was just, and we're going to talk about this in a couple of topics, that was more than a head scratch. That was, if your Alabama team that Nick Saban built, I don't care who's coaching you, that's an unacceptable performance, especially from that offense for Alabama. So, yeah, I mean, a bunch of the teams that they were kind of vying for one of those playoff spots with, they went and stubbed their toe. So it was like the Abe Simpson gif coming into the bar, hanging his hat up on the coat rack, and then turning around, getting his hat, putting it on, and walking right back out again. That was kind of Indiana's. Day on Saturday. They kind of exited the college football playoff talk, and then 6-8 hours later, they were right back in it again, and deservedly so.
Let's talk about the Buckeye side of the equation now. They have played 3 top 5 games this year. They're the only team in the country that's done that. They won 2 of them, and the one they lost was by 1 point. I think regardless of what happens against Michigan this weekend, and this is the biggest opening line favorite against Michigan that the Buckeyes have ever been. The lines come down a little bit, but I mean, they're a prohibitive favorite to win that game. But no matter what happens, I think they're a prohibitive favorite now to make the playoff at least. I don't know that they're going to quite be as impressive as what maybe people were hoping for with the kind of quarterback they have. I just don't think that's a C.J. Stroud level of quarterback, so they're not quite as explosive offensively, but they're so deep everywhere else. They're so, everywhere. They're so talented everywhere that they're now the betting favorite for the Natty. Much was made also, I don't know how much of this was just media stuff. I kind of liked it as a Michigan fan, the Will Howard throwing the cigarette butt out and squashing it, after beating Curt Cignetti, and the fake knee and then quarterback sneak. And the reason I liked it as a Michigan fan is, us in Ohio State kind of view ourselves, I think rightfully so, as this basically the subsidies. We're the subsidy provider for the rest of this league. And I mean, Curt Cignetti came in talking a lot of mess, bro, a lot of mess, and so don't be surprised when you tug on Superman's cape and you ain't got the kryptonite, if he knocks your block off. And I think that's kind of what Ohio State was doing there at the end of the game. But this is why they spent all that money for right here. And now they're on the brink of it. They've got a wounded Wolverine. Some may say that's a dangerous one. I don't think so. And they can avenge 3 years of frustration there, go to Indianapolis, avenge the frustration against Oregon there, and then see if they can live up to the natty or bust mantle that Michigan lived up to last year. And now, Aaron, it's their turn.
Yeah, I saw the Indy Star. I think it was belly aching about the Buckeyes running up the score against Indiana. Bro, y'all played Western Illinois and hung 70 on them. You played Nebraska, hung 50 on them. I think there was 50 against Nebraska. I mean, you've been running up the score against basically every opponent that you could do that against. So spare me that garbage. And yeah, I appreciate, to the point of being able to back up, the talk, Curt Cignetti, that first halftime, I can't remember against which opponent it was, just kind of laughing at the sideline reporter before going into the locker room. I'm like, this guy is arrogant AF. But then he went out and won a bunch of games. Still though, you still got to play the cream of the crop, which they hadn't yet. And it's always, I'm simultaneously amused at the sit down and know your role thing, and I'm simultaneously amused by the talking a lot of trash, and you backed it up until a point. So I don't know, kind of looking at it from the outside looking in. I think Cignetti's gotten what he's deserved all the way around from both angles.
I think that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I think as far as the Buckeyes are concerned, congratulations. I mean, you're not going to be able to roll your helmets out this weekend and beat Michigan, but you're right where you want it to be. You've got the best resume in the nation. Honestly, and this, I'll tease this for Would You Rather. There's a scenario in which you might actually, even if you win this game, of course, assuming you beat Michigan in the game, you're playing with house money one way or another. You lose the Big Ten championship game, maybe get the 5 seed, or win the Big Ten championship game, you'll get the 1 seed. I don't know. I feel like Buckeye Nation, you're kind of in a can't-lose scenario, provided you take care of business against Michigan.
And props to them. They put themselves in that situation, so they deserve to be there. You've indirectly referenced the college football playoff rankings a couple times. Let's take a look at the latest offering from the committee. Oregon and Ohio State remain 1-2. Texas, whose 2 best wins currently are Vanderbilt and Arkansas and Michigan, who are both slated to probably go 6-5. They're 3, I guess. Penn State, who probably should have lost to Minnesota. And James Franklin did one of these "what you doings," and it finally worked. It finally worked. That fake punt probably won them that game and clinched a playoff berth for them. It's a little bit like we said about Nebraska last week. How many more times in a row could it just go wrong? Sooner or later, it's got to go right. Well, one of these, James Franklin's "what you doing" worked. And so Penn State's up there, Notre Dame's there, Miami, who I still don't understand why they're rated ahead against SMU when they're actually the ones leading the conference, but okay. Georgia, Tennessee, and there's Indiana. Boise State there at 11, and that would be your cutoff, along with Clemson for the top 12 teams to make it to the college football playoff. Looking at the rest of these rankings, Iowa State controls its own destiny. It doesn't.
It does not. No, I thought it did.
If they win on Saturday, they're not automatically in now?
No, there's a couple of scenarios. Now, they are.
Oh, okay.
I think the main scenario is if Cincinnati beats BYU, it would be Colorado and Arizona State.
Oh,
and I'm a little worried about that because I think the other scenario, I think it's whoever West Virginia is playing. If they lose, then BYU is playing for nothing, and that game happens after the Iowa State game on Saturday night.
Okay.
So they don't control their own destiny. I thought they did, but there's a really interesting scenario in which they could actually be eliminated from contention for the Big 12 championship game based on the Cincinnati BYU game. Anyway, sorry.
That would be something. They go. That's a good clarification. They go 10-2 for the first time in school history and still don't go to the conference championship game. That would be something. Is there any? I'm kind of surprised.
The Alabama has no business being at 13.
I agree. And let me tell you this: looking at the quality wins Illinois has, shouldn't they be ranked one of the higher 3-loss teams?
Who is that?
Illinois.
Yeah, Illinois. Yep. Yeah.
I mean, don't they have like four wins over ranked teams? Yeah. I think this year.
And their one loss against a ranked team was against Oregon, and it was a big loss. But it's the number one team in the country. So
overall, though, I don't really have too many complaints. The Miami SMU thing befuddles me, but they're going to settle that on the field probably, right? So what's it matter, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing that really irked me is Alabama at 13. That's just an SEC ESPN play. That's all. Mm-hmm. That's all it is. They have no business. Top 20, maybe. Top 25, maybe. That would be more appropriate. But tell me, what's the justification for putting them there ahead of, I could make an argument for Ole Miss, but Arizona State needs to be probably, or Iowa. Arizona State or Iowa State, I think, probably has a more compelling, just based on how they've done against their schedule, has a more compelling argument. So that's just a good old-fashioned SEC ESPN play.
You want to talk about SEC ESPN? Have you seen the latest ESPN FPI?
Yeah.
Alabama with 3 losses is 4th.
It's a joke.
4th. All right. Let's get to Nebraska. It finally happened. They did rush the field. I'm not going to blame them. The 10th time, Aaron, the charm. After 9 straight losses going back years when a bowl bid was on the line, one of the most amazeballs stats I have ever seen. Nebraska finally got it done against Wisconsin at home, a game they pretty much led stem to stern all the way through. Wisconsin made a little bit of a run, but never really got the feeling that they were going to win this football game. And now Nebraska's long Cornhusker nightmare is over. They will return to a bowl game for the first time since Barack Obama was wrapping up his presidency in 2016. I would imagine, given how hungry this fan base is, I would imagine however high they can go in the rules, given they will at least have 4 losses and maybe 5 if they lose to Iowa Friday night. However high they can go in the bowl pecking order, I would imagine they will go, given their brand name and the desperation of their fans. So they finally got it done. They're off the schneid. We're going to see Nebraska in a bowl game again. I believe you had just come to work for me the last time Nebraska was in a bowl game, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't grow up watching college football in the 90s, but even when I did start paying attention to college football in the mid-2000s, I knew how powerful of a brand, even in the Big 12, Nebraska was, and how big of a deal it was for them to come to the Big 10 and to sit here still. It befuddles me, despite the fact that they're finally in, to sit here after 8 seasons or whatever it is, 7-8 seasons, and they're finally in a bowl game again. After all of these coaches, the return of the favored son and Scott Frost, and that just completely blowing up in their faces. Questions this year about, is Matt Rule really the guy? And I think those will, to some degree, persist into the offseason. Finally, you've got something to build off of. Because all of these seasons, first seasons of coach, you kind of give them a pass. Second years, why aren't we making a bowl game? Well, this year they finally did. So they finally have something to build off of. And that's basically all I can say about Nebraska at this point. They did enough, and that was a resounding win against Wisconsin. But they did enough to make it to the postseason. They've got some extra evaluation to do, and Matt Rule talked about that, how this is going to be kind of a time to start to see, and he's not saying that he's happy about it, but this is going to be kind of what I was saying a few weeks ago on Bigger 10. These bowl practices are kind of going to be tryouts for the the rest of your team that may not make the roster come the House settlement later in the next year. So good for them. Hats off to Nebraska fans. It's a little cringe watching them storm the field after a 6th win, but when it's been 8 years and you're a brand like that, who cares?
Well, that brings us to my first attempt at bowl projections, and I can tell you I think they're already wrong, but let's take a look. All right, so I think the playoff, Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana are all locks. The only thing I think that could disturb it is if Penn State were to lose to Maryland. And then I do think, given their overall weakness of schedule and how unimpressive they've been in a lot of these games, that could come into play. But I don't see that happening. I have Illinois heading to the Citrus Bowl, Iowa heading to the former Outback Bowl, the ReliaQuest. I think you probably would swap at this point Michigan and Nebraska because of what I just said. And that would put Nebraska in Charlotte for the Duke's Mayos Bowl, Michigan and Nashville for the Music City, and where they could actually face LSU, and wouldn't that be something with the Bryce Underwood stuff? I've got Wisconsin beating Minnesota this weekend and going to the Pinstripe. Minnesota going out to Arizona, maybe arguably getting the better trip to the guaranteed rate. And then Rutgers heading to Detroit. It's now called the Game Above Bowl in scenic, beautiful Christmas Town, downtown Detroit. Aaron, your thoughts on? Oh, you might be asking, where are the Pac-12 schools? They're all still tied to their old bowl
affiliations
contracts.
Yeah.
Yes. So for at least another year or two, they're still going to be tied to those. That's why there's no USC or Washington here. All right. So what do you think, Aaron?
So, yeah, no major squabbles. I will say, just as an Iowa fan, I was looking at the standings. I don't think there's any way that they can either improve or fall below, I think, 6th in the Big Ten. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, there's no way I think they can do better or worse than 6th in the Big Ten. So, yeah, they're going to go to, what is that, Tampa? Yeah, Tampa, or no matter what. I don't know. If you're a Michigan-Nebraska fan, if you're a Nebraska fan, wouldn't you rather go to Nashville than Charlotte?
Probably.
But, what you would rather do kind of has no bearing on what's actually going to happen. Pinstripe, cool stadium, bro, guaranteed rate. Hey, it's Arizona. That's good. And then the game above is just vomit-inducing. So that's how I feel about bowl games, and that's kind of how college football, I think, as a whole feels about bowl games. They're just glorified, at best, exhibitions.
Yeah, they're basically now extra spring practices for next year. Yeah, that's essentially what they are. And they're televised. They still get great rating. Not much else on that time of year. And people want something to watch while they're gathered with a bunch of folks they're pretending that they like and they don't, So, all right, let's take a break. When we come back, let's play some Would You Rather here in a moment. All right, Aaron, let's play some Would You Rather here on Bigger Ten. My question for you: would you rather bet your last $100 on Washington money line plus 650 at Oregon, or Michigan money line plus 1,100 at Ohio State this weekend?
Michigan money line. And I wouldn't bet either of these in real life, neither money lines. It's just Michigan, Ohio State is the quintessential head case rivalry. I've seen so many weird things happen. I mean, I can't remember what year it was, but I remember it was in Ann Arbor, and they got into a big scuffle, and an Ohio State player, and this has been within the last decade, an Ohio State player left the field flipping the double bird to the Ann Arbor crowd. I can't remember who that was. There's just a few years ago, you mentioned this on Michigan podcast yesterday, a Michigan player trying to screw up the shoelaces of an Ohio State. There's just weird things that happen in this bowl game. I don't think there's much of a chance Michigan, Ohio State can't just roll their hats out there and win. I don't think there's much of a chance that Michigan can just play their best game and win. I'm just saying weird things happen in this bowl game. It is a head case. And so for that reason alone, not to take anything away from the Oregon-Washington rivalry either, but I've just seen really weird things happen in that bowl game. In that rivalry game. For you, if you're a Wisconsin fan, would you rather your team lose this weekend to your biggest rival to increase the odds Fickle gets canned? I don't think he does get canned, but it increases the odds. Or would you rather them win and go to a meaningless bowl game knowing none of your issues really have been addressed?
I think I've got to know, if he doesn't make it, does it get canned? And Because if I think the answer to that is likely yes, then you might as well lose. And I think Luke Fickell's a very good coach. But I told you from the very beginning on our show, I just didn't see this fit. And it reminded me a lot of Rich Rod. Remember, I told you that watching them in their very first spring, playing a spring game in the snow, trying to, air raid the ball around, it kind of looked ridiculous. And now, Phil Longo, who's a pretty celebrated offensive coordinator, by the way, he's crap canned. Luke Fickell's talking like it doesn't matter who the OC is. This relationship is souring. Now, he's really tied to the new AD, Chris McIntosh. He wanted to reinvent Wisconsin football, Freudian slip, because his old coach that he played at Nebraska. But if I think it will get him fired so we can start over, because this is actually the year to make a big head coaching move. It's going to be a pretty calm coaching carousel amongst the power conference schools. Wisconsin would be among the most coveted jobs out there. In a typical cycle, it might not be. So if I knew that McIntosh would make a move if they lost, then I'd be in favor of a loss. But I would need to know that ahead of time.
All right, this one's from you.
Would you rather keep Ryan Walters for year 3 or fire him and pay the buyout and move on if you were Purdue? Right now, reports are indicating he's going to be brought back. We'll see if that's still the case if it's 50-3 Indiana on Saturday.
Yeah, I kind of think if he hasn't been fired yet, they're probably going to hold on to him. As far as what I would like if I were a Purdue fan, I would just try to move on. You're looking at your in-state rival. Try to replicate that. Who is the Curt Cignetti of this cycle? And as I said earlier this season, Cignetti's kind of a unicorn. He's kind of got the 2 or 3-legged stool of capable coach looking to go elsewhere. And I have a roster full of players who aren't immediately going to graduate after the successful season at a lower level conference. So it is a kind of a unicorn. So I think schools are going to do themselves a disservice. Who's the next Coach Cignetti? But at the same time, you're looking at your in-state school over there, and you're like, if he can do that in year 1, could we get somebody to be competitive in a year 1 or 2? Because they were not competitive, save for a couple of games. I think it was the Illinois game where, they lost on the last play of overtime. Save for a couple of games, you really have not been competitive. So I would rather just cut your losses and move on. All right, final one for you. If you're a Buckeye fan, would you rather lose in the Big Ten Championship, assuming you beat Michigan this week? Would you rather lose in the Big Ten Championship game and get the 5 seed or win and get the 1? The 5 seed, of course, has probably going to have the easiest path. The 1 seed, well, you get a bye, and it's not the worst thing either. Which would you rather have?
I just can't bring myself to the point that foregoing a certain championship because it puts me in position to better potentially win another one. I just can't get there. I can't. And I maybe that will be the way of things moving forward. But to me, the Big Ten championship still matters quite a bit. I'd want to win a Big Ten championship, especially after watching my hated rival Michigan hoist that trophy 3 years in a row at my expense. I would want to go and win the Big Ten championship and avenge our only loss. That's what I'd want. Now, give me the certified guarantee of a trophy in my trophy case over the potential of one later.
All right, that's it.
All right, we'll come back and we'll do our X poll results and our feedback of the week next. This week's X or Twitter poll results: which underdog has the best chance to pull a rivalry week upset over a likely Big Ten playoff team? 35% of you said Michigan over Ohio State. 33% of you said Washington over Oregon. 21% said Maryland over Penn State. Penn State has just owned Maryland for 60 years. And then only 12% said Purdue over Indiana, which is both a statement of how bad the Boilermakers have been this year and also how good Indiana has been up until last week. So let's face it, none of these are great odds. No. It's kind of a scheduling anomaly that they're all facing their biggest rival as the likely playoff representatives of the league, in the final week of the season. But if you had to vote, it looks like you voted for Michigan, Ohio State for the reasons you said earlier. Yeah, it's just weird things I've seen happen in this rivalry. It's very much a head case game. That being said, I don't think there's much of a chance Michigan can go into the shoe and pull out the win. So I generally think that where these line up is probably pretty accurate in terms of odds. If you're looking at this in a vacuum, maybe Washington or over Oregon, you'd give a little bit better odds too. Mm-hmm. But you really can't split hairs on something like this. If I had to pick one, I would also pick Michigan, but not for homer reasons. It's just because of all the other teams you mentioned here. Of the 4 teams that are playing the league's likely 4 playoff reps, there is only one elite position group in those 4, and it's the Michigan defensive line. And there are 2 positions where you can completely take over, or 3 positions where you can completely take over a college football game: quarterback, offensive line, defensive line. And so to me, that gives Michigan, I guess, especially if temps are going to be, Aaron, 27 degrees at kickoff, the proverbial puncher's chance where instead of a 1%, maybe it's 10 or 15. Okay, so that's why I would pick Michigan. But, I'm with you. I don't think there's really high odds with any of those 4. All right, let's get to our feedback of the week. Matthew Brown says, perhaps the most consequential decision and best in-game coaching moment of James Franklin's entire Penn State coaching career was the gutsy fake punt call there at the end of the Minnesota game. And I agree. Now, if he Aaron, if that doesn't work and Minnesota's already in field goal range to win the game at the end, can you even imagine? Remember the scene when he was walking off the field last year after losing to Michigan and he got into it with his own fans? Remember that? Okay. Yeah. Can you even imagine what media in Pennsylvania is like for him when he gets back home? If Minnesota stuffs that, it's already in field goal range and wins the game because he tried that. On the other hand, though, it's a legendary call in Penn State lore, and it likely did secure them a playoff spot. So props to James Franklin. It's a little early for a Bill Raftery citation, but we'll do it anyway. That was onions.
Indeed, and that wasn't the only big coaching moment he had in the game. There was at one point he had to get on Drew Aller. Is it Aller?
It's Aller.
It's been 4 years, and I cannot say his name correctly. Aller. He had to get on Drew Aller for something. I don't know what it was. Aller got really upset. Franklin went over him. And when he was getting on Aller, it wasn't over the top or anything. It was just Aller knew he screwed up, and he was getting frustrated. And Franklin went over to him on the bench, talked to him, and Aller came right back in, had the rest of the game. I think he had 1 incompletion. So that was a really good coaching performance from James Franklin. It was. Yes, it absolutely was. And it's not something where we should be like, oh, this is faint praise. This is, again, we're not trying to be over the top. It's just that was a really good coaching moment from James Franklin, and overall in a really hostile environment, because there were multiple moments. This was a game that I got to watch most of the second half of. There were multiple moments where it felt like if one little thing went wrong for Penn State, it was going to come crashing down pretty quick. That environment, despite it didn't look like it was full in Minnesota, but it was, whoever was there was juiced. That was a really, really tough place. I mean, hats off to Minnesota as well for having a good game against them. But it was ultimately that call from James Franklin that saved their season and maybe his job.
Amen. All right, that'll do it for this week's episode of Bigger 10. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review, comment. Do all of those things for us, whether you're watching right here on YouTube or listening on iTunes or via other platforms. Doing those things helps us to find more Big Ten fans just like you. We appreciate that, so thank you. And hopefully you appreciate what a great blessing it is to live in this country and have things like Feast Week for basketball and Rivalry Week for football, and get to enjoy those things this week and enjoy all of your Thanksgivings. We'll be back here soon on the Bigger 10. For Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Dace. Again, happy Thanksgiving to all y'all.